Introduce Adrian Lane from Securosis. Is going to talk about data breaches and encryption. And from reading the abstract again in the program, just the why, when, how, like when should you be using encryption and in what ways. And again, another relatively underexplored topic, and a lot of security people will just tell you to go overkill and use it all the time. So I think this should be a very interesting perspective on that. I'll hand it over.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to see me. This is data breaches and encryption. I know the catalog says something a little bit different. I apologize. That was our mistake. As you can tell, I'm not Rich Mogul. He was supposed to speak here today on a different topic, but we had asked the panelists for the source show, what else did you might want to hear? And overwhelmingly, a majority picked. They wanted to hear about data breaches and encryption. So. We don't normally give this talk to security experts, and there are a lot of security experts here today. But if there's something in particular you want to get out of this talk today, let me know. If it's more on the applied side, I will not mention vendors. I don't want to get into the whole which vendor is better or any of that. But if you have got specific questions, please by all means let me know. So I know some of you are looking forward to seeing Rich's baby pictures, and we were really trying to find some, and so this is the best we can do until he actually makes some. So anyway, sorry for the inside joke to start with, but okay, joke's no longer funny. So I wanted to originally do this presentation talking about more recent data breaches and why we're motivated to use encryption to solve some of the problems we have with data breaches. But I realize that a lot of the people I'm speaking with don't have the same perspective that I do or that Rich and I do. And so I actually went back in time and I pulled from some of Rich's slide decks and from my slide decks. They're actually kind of old. They're a couple of years old. And I apologize for some of the reference material being back from 2000. But I think from a standpoint of understanding the mentality of some of the businesses and why they have not adopted certain technologies, I think it's important. So really, the first breach that I was aware of as a security professional was the Egghead breach. So you're talking back in December of 2000, where egghead.com, and I'm sure some of you remember that they were who they were, and software seller, and they were the first reported breach that I had ever heard of. And very interesting case that shortly thereafter the breach, they had gone into business. And many companies saw the headlines, and naturally just assumed that when they went out of business several months later, that the two were related. But the incidents of the breach had caused a problem with their customer base, had cost them investigative costs and legal costs, and the metrics revealed that the company went out of business for normal business reasons. They weren't producing enough revenue to support their model. And they eventually got sold to Amazon, I believe. But from this, the industry learned the wrong lesson. And many of the companies learned that, we need to keep quiet about breaches. We don't want to talk about breaches because it could lead to poor results, can destabilize the stock price, and so forth. It was the wrong lesson, but it's what they learned. So businesses kept quiet, and what did we see? More and more and more. In many cases, these are very much after the fact. The Axiom breach was a long time before it was actually reported in the public. These are all cases prior to California 1386 and other breach notification laws. So what do we get? July 2003, California 1386 comes along. For those who don't know what this is, it's a piece of, it's the California Senate Bill 1386, which requires anyone who does business in California, should they have a data breach, and California residents are part of that breach, that those California customers must be notified. Now, there is no penalty if you go ahead and notify, but if you don't, you can face penalties. However, based upon the lessons that they had learned, California 1386 in a large part was ignored. And I can say that because I'm aware of a number of cases personally where the companies decided not to disclose. I've got friends in the financial community where breaches were had and they chose not to disclose. I've got friends who used to and currently work for the cyber threat teams for the Secret Service who have disclosed that there have been breaches. They haven't named companies, but they have let me know that there are breaches. I've got a friend in the FBI who's let me know that there have been breaches, and some of the customers of companies that I've worked for. Is anybody in this room, because we do have security professionals in here, is anybody in this room aware of a breach that has not gone public? It has not been disclosed in the press? Only 3 hands, okay. Usually it's higher than that. But there is a culture of keeping quiet in many cases. And one of the gray areas that I commonly see is that whether it be Secret Service teams might still be conducting investigation, they may be still collecting evidence that they intend to admit in court. And they also, one of the other gray areas was the encryption. And I don't know how many of you saw Dave Mortman's presentation on this, but one of the questions I asked is there anything to do with the legislation to change it so that users of encryption actually have to have end-to-end encryption to avoid notification loss? Because many of the companies were not disclosing because at some point in their information life cycle, they were encrypting backup tapes, some of the disk drives, or some of the remote regional servers, but not all of the data. Next in our preamble here, our long preamble, the choice point, and the first major breach after 1386 is in full effect. So early on, unusual activity, some 50 small business operators, and I call this fortuitous missteps. I had the good fortune to actually be in the office of Cheryl Peace, who at the time was the cyber threat advisor for the Bush administration. And this was the morning where they had learned it was about 100 and some odd thousand records. And she was pissed off. And I mean, eye-twitching pissed off. And because 2 days before I was there in her office, the executives from ChoicePoint had been there and said, don't worry about it. We have it under control. We think it's about 100 to 125 records. It ended up being 125,000 plus records that were breached. And so what in essence happened is there was nobody from the Bush administration who was going to protect this company. They were not going to shield them, that they were going to let them bear the full brunt of this because they felt they had been lied to. So this is one of the very first times I think we got full disclosure because we really were able to see some of what happened. We got actual numbers of what was breached. So what were the losses? Oops. Somewhere around $10 million in lawsuits. We all know about the FTC settlement, and some of the other breach remediation costs were associated. In today's terms, this actually looks pretty small. We also learned this was a business process failure, business policy failure, that they didn't actually vet the people to their normal business process who had gained access to the information. And I'm sure some of you already know this, but it really, once again, we have a breach here that it's early enough in the cycle that it's really cementing the minds of a lot of people who are going to react to this. We also learned that they had a prior breach. Technical controls did not eliminate the problem. And while the business policy could have been enforced by some of the technical controls, they did not do it at that time. And the other odd thing is it taught the businesses to react differently. That everybody who was watching this, who had had an internal breach, watched the stock price, watched how they handled it, and realized that the stock price and other sorts of public opinion was due to PR and how they appeared to the press and how they appeared to the public, just like their stock always is. It was a popularity contest. How do we appear to be reacting to this? Does it look like we have a plan? And so in many cases, we didn't see the companies really want to deal with the security problem at hand, but they might deal with some of the business processing issues of it, and they might have a plan in place, but it was more of a PR exercise than a security exercise. Having worked at a financial institution for a number of years as a CIO, I can tell you that from that perspective, it's a very different opinion or approach to solving the problem. The businesses suffer from the breaches, and the customer may or may not have some degree of fraud there. And so the businesses that I've worked for, businesses that I've talked to, especially in the financial sector, look at this as a business problem. It's their problem. It's an inside problem, not an external issue. That their stock price benefited, and the market in general benefited from their silence. And we're in the business of risk. We loan money. We give insurance policies out. So we've got fraud built into the model. And as long as we're, at or below our expected fraud rates, it's okay. So we'll just handle this as a PR exercise. We'll have a plan. We'll react to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to invest in security. I can't help myself. I was a vendor for 4 years. This is my big number slide. This is my dog and pony slide, and I always deliver this. And the number comes from September 15, 2008. It's clearly out of date, but it's irrelevant anyways. The number doesn't matter. But I want to show it here because when I give this presentation to companies, I need to do something to shock them into realizing that there is a problem, that the records are being stolen, that there is an issue here. But as a security researcher, it means nothing, because even though there are 350 million, probably over 400 million now with the various breaches since September 2008, it's not an indicator of fraud. It's not an indicator that somebody has taken those records and actually done something with them.
That makes the number of records put at risk.
Put at risk, exactly. So.
Do we have records for the number of records actually utilized to commit fraud?
Not very good ones, which is one of the reoccurring themes of this conference. You'll hear people saying we are lacking a lot of the metrics that we need. We have about 30% in uneven cases. It's another reason why this number is so irrelevant, is that for half the breaches out there, we don't have numbers. They have never disclosed the number of records that might have been, either because they don't know or they don't want to tell you. So why give you a normally high number if they don't really know? So they just omit it. And it's one of the areas where we'd really like to see the breach notification laws change, so that they have to disclose what it is that they know, or at least come out and say, we think it is this. Have some estimate, have some clue. And find them if they don't, because really they should have some sort of clue, or have some investigative process that tells them more or less what happened. So anyway, the number is more or less meaningless. That said, when you're talking about this number of records that have been compromised, and one of the reasons I didn't actually update the number to be current is that the very first things I remember is the Heartland payment systems and the Royal Bank of Scotland WorldPay system breaches. So in Hartford, we don't really know what the number is. We do know that they have contacted some 600 plus financial agencies have recognized some degree of fraud, but we don't know the actual numbers within each one of those agencies. They have alerted 150,000 of the merchants, of the 160,000 merchants that they work with, advising them on how to detect and deter some of the data loss. They have announced that they are going to perform end-to-end encryption, which implies that they are not doing it today. And so this is the 6th largest credit card processing company in the United States. You're talking 100 million credit card transactions a month. And the number is so staggering that if somebody was to be able to get 20, 30, 40 million credit card numbers, it's a very destabilizing thing to the system itself. Adam Shosak in his presentation had given a challenge to say, can you give me more than the known one example of a company failing due to a data breach, the card systems example. And I can't. I don't know if anybody else in the room can, but I don't think it's the right question. What I really think is the right question, is what does it do to the system itself? If I have 50 million credit card numbers and I was really determined, I can take down this system. I could automate shopping, go across 100 different or 1,000 different or 10,000 different merchant sites. I could take a QA system, and sit there and change the credit card number, name, and address. And I don't care where the merchandise goes. But if I exercise this in, let's say, Black Black Friday before, you know, the major shopping period during the holidays, and take 50 million credit card numbers and start just pumping them out there, I can overwhelm the fraud departments. I can overwhelm the system so where they're going to have to cancel 20, 30, 40 million cards immediately, and they're probably going to have to shut down the system. And you know what that's going to do to commerce in the United States, internet commerce or even in-person commerce, because now the card's not going to be valid anymore. They can't trust it. So to me, it's not necessarily an issue of just this company or that company any longer, that there's so much low-hanging fruit out there, and there's so much information, personally identifiable information, credit card information, and I don't know about you guys, but one of my credit cards at least is also a debit card. I didn't ask for it, it just came that way. So somebody can take that number and then try to go find a savings account as well. So, as I said, meaningless number, but to me, it signifies a lot that what we're seeing, that some of these breaches are now potentially on the same magnitude of all of the breaches that we've seen up until this point. So, that's my long preamble. Why don't we get into some of the causes of data breaches, and let's talk about encryption and how we apply it to the problem. So, lost and stolen laptops, still absolutely positively number one. Not sexy, not new, but still that is the case. Lost and stolen backup tapes, I'm including media and memory sticks in this. Inadvertent disclosure, number three. Hacking and compromise. Oh, and by the way, I actually expect this list, excuse me, probably within the next couple of years to actually reverse. As companies are actually starting to encrypt their laptops. And most of the financial institutions I'm talking to have got the laptops encrypted. Most of the major auditing firms have all their laptops encrypted. You know, so at least 50% of the companies that I've talked to in the last year have this already done or underway. Did you have a question?
Do you agree that while loss of laptop may be the #1 cause of data breach, that the hacking and compromise is probably the most effective, that net the most records?
I think it's going to net the most records in the future, because I think we're seeing evidence of that with the RBS WorldPay incident. And for those of you not familiar, I mean, RBS, they said they lost 1.5 million financial records and another 1.1 million in personally identifiable information records, so just personal records. So yeah, I think that is probably going to be the case. We don't have great statistics, though. I mean, I can't stand by that. I can't give you an example. I can't demonstrate it for you. It's just purely a hunch on my part.
Do you have a sense on the lost and stolen laptops, how many of those are just somebody sees a laptop on a car and smashes a window?
It's almost always. In fact, you know, when laptops first came out, they were being stolen right and left. Nobody thought that the data on the laptop might actually be more valuable than the laptop itself. You know, they were just looking for a couple $100 quick cash. Now those things are, you know, people will buy SCSI drives off of eBay to go look to see if there's personally identifiable information. Hey, it's $12, what the heck? I might get lucky. And they do. I mean, we're still seeing cases of this. We are still seeing cases where you know, information or machines just get sold onto eBay, and they don't even, there's no end point to the information life cycle there. There's no crypto shredding. There's no erasure of those disks. And I'll get a little bit more of that in this presentation. So more examples, not particularly interesting to me, might be to you. You can reference them later. We'll put the slide deck up on the site. But a lot of people really want to know that there are examples, clear examples out there, specifically to lost and stolen laptops, 85 million. These are the number of records in the 335 incidences. I believe this one is through December of 2008. High-profile example, Veterans Administration. And we bring this one up just simply because it's kind of common, and it's sad that, you know, laptop stolen, an additional external hard drive was also stolen at the same time. VA blames the employee. Inspector General finds out, well, you know, this is, you know, you haven't trained the employees, you haven't provided them with any way to protect this, you demanded as part of their job to have the information. So they mandate that encryption is supposed to be there. but they don't do anything about it. They don't give them funding, they don't give them training, they don't tell them which software they should buy, and sure enough, 45 days later, there's another incident.
Yeah, it was actually a burglary from the house, which makes sense.
Yes. Well, I mean, whether it's, smash and grab out of the back of the car. There was a ring in San Francisco for a while that was, they had these little Bluetooth locators, and they were just walking through parking lots and shopping malls waiting till they got a hit from Bluetooth, and they figured it was laptop, jacked the trunk, and they were gone. There were a couple hundred cases of that in the Bay Area, actually. So, it's not just a U.S. problem, Our European friends also have the issue as well. Anyway, not particularly interesting. So data as it moves is not being used. And we don't necessarily need to view it at that point in time. And really, this is a perfect application for encryption. The ability to secure it as it moves from point A to point B, or if it is sitting somewhere, once again, it's not data in use. And another point in time where encryption is absolutely positively an appropriate technology to secure data. And so laptops and media get stolen. They're going to continue to get stolen. People are going to forget them. Ineptness or clumsiness or carelessness are going to continually be causes, and it's not something a matter of training. It really is going to help with a lot. So you need to plan on it. This is going to continue to happen. Embrace the fact that it's going to happen. They're going to get stolen. So, and there's really not a lot of other options here. Your employees are going to use the data. It's part of their job. They need it to perform the business function that they are hired to do. And you really don't have another option other than encryption. And you can tell them not to put it on there, but odds are it's going to get there. So the 4 rules that we have for encryption and securosis: if data moves physically or virtually, if any storage for separation of duty, so there are a number of regulatory requirements that require separation of duty for fraud detection as well as for privacy, and then very specific regulatory mandates.
Is that a little better or just sensitive?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to go in a little bit more about data in use in a second. But the commingling of information and the ability to piece together sensitive information sometimes warrants that you mandate encryption of all. If I'm going to do a mobile disk drive, a memory stick, a laptop, encrypt the drive. I mean, now I'm giving you that advice, and right here on my laptop, I've got folder level encryption, but I don't try not to keep anything on the laptop. So I actually got my start in encryption. My first serious security job was writing encryption code, and it is something that really works. I mean, encryption can provide computationally impossible to reverse engineer data. I mean, it really is effective, provided you've got reasonably good secure key management to go along with it. You need to make sure that they are not writing the passwords on the top of the laptop. Was it Keys that had shown me the picture today? The username and passwords literally printed right on top of the laptop. But encryption is actually not particularly easy to do right, and so this is not something you're going to be doing at home. Encryption does rely on a lot of different factors, like trusted pseudo-random number generators, to actually give you a good randomness in the production of these encrypted data streams or data storage. How many of you know what entropy is? 1, 2? Oh, okay, good. When I got my start, I didn't know a darn thing about entropy, and one of the attacks against the system was to literally feed a series of 1s into the entropy stream, which caused the pseudo-random number generator to be not very random, and they broke the system I had deployed. So these are elements that must be there to help and make sure that you have good cryptography. However, we have a number of vendors out there who really know how to do this well, that have been doing this for a long time, have the appropriate cryptographers who know how to design algorithms. They have people who are trained in the implementation of those algorithms, and they put together a well-respected, exercised, and analyzed both white box and black box the quality of the end results. So we know how to do this. The science is there, the implementations are there. There are a lot of good vendors out there. Oh yeah, you got to kind of make sure they're not running on compromised platforms either. So there is a reliance on some network security here, or platform security. So portable media, I've already talked about this. There are also, you can do this for software. There are some vendors I won't mention, but they also put chips in that will go ahead and encrypt memory, the little memory sticks. And there's plenty of the software options for removable media, CD-ROMs that will go ahead and auto-encrypt. It's almost seamless. Whole disk drives, Apple for use or Mac users, you know that they come standard. There are a number of a number of vendors who provide very good whole drive encryption, and most of the drive vendors now are producing disk drives that are having encryption built in also. So if it is lost or stolen, you don't worry about it showing up on eBay with all your data. On the back end, there are other options as well, especially for the enterprise customer. So file and folder level encryption, application and database, and once again, all of the same options for media, but for the enterprise space. Now, application and database is a little bit different. Technically, a database is not data at rest. Oops. It is data in quasi-rest. It's used. It generates reports. There are queries constantly run against the database. So there are ways of either segregating out data sets, moving table spaces, column level encryption that do very, very well. A lot of companies I deal with do not encrypt the database. The performance impact is still at a point where it is not necessarily operationally viable. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. But there's almost always some piece of design work on the operations side to change the way things are working to get it to be a viable solution. If your business, though, is transacting credit card numbers, you'd better do it. Not just because of PCI, but because somebody will get in there. Somebody will, get, through SQL injection, through access to the platform, or just pure stupidity. Somehow, somebody will get in there. So if that's your business, plan on doing it. But it might take some severe steps to get it to work properly. I typically recommend the database providers. Most of the platform providers have optimized their code in such a way that it works pretty darn well. It's effective key management as long as it's external to the database, but the encryption algorithms they're using are solid, they're well designed, well implemented, and they're faster than what I'm finding from the other third-party vendors. This was not the case 2 years ago. So obviously encryption is not a panacea. As I'd mentioned in the other slide, if the platform's compromised, you can do just about anything. If you own the platform, you're going to see just about everything. You're going to see the S boxes when you're going to find the keys. So there are other things that need to go along with it. Plus, it's not good for certain types of problems. So you still need access and authorization. You're still going to need audit capabilities to make sure that the transactions going on in these encrypted channels or with this data are valid. You still need a reliable platform and network. And one of the things I recommend is data validation. How many of you are familiar with immutable logs? Anybody? One person, okay. Then I will explain. So the common protection for data at rest is encryption, because it allows us to both achieve privacy of the data, because you can't read it, but it also gives us a degree of reliability or unalterability, because if you touch the encryption file, you get garbage out when you try to decrypt it. But once you do decrypt it, it's not necessarily untamperable anymore. You can change values. So immutable logs and data validation technologies are such that we are taking the data, and sometimes it's file by file or page by page or record by record, but we are creating a digital hash on that, so we can verify that the contents have not been changed. We will sign that so we know that the hash came from the appropriate authority. We might chain that information so that we take sequence information so that this record is now next to this record, which is next to this record, and taking some sequence of information, putting it into that hash and putting it into that signature value so that information cannot be inserted. And we will also timestamp that so that we know when it was produced. And we'll even do something with key swapping to show that we are the real signing party and somebody didn't take our keys and go somewhere else and then recreate this chain. So there are these types of immutable log file and data validation technologies that are very effective when trying to produce court admissible evidence. These are handy in e-discovery. They're not a requirement yet. I expect NIST, because John Kelsey, I believe, just produced a paper on data validation requirements for NIST, I think might be adopted by the U.S. government. So for those of you selling into the government, this might be something you want to look into. Moving along into our second topic, which is lost tapes and lost backup media. I'm sure a lot of you in the room are familiar with the Bank of America incident. Basically, the tape fell off the back of the truck. This one still makes me mad today. And I used to talk a lot at ISSA chapters around the country. And so, members of ISSA usually are pretty good with security. They're practitioners day to day. An overwhelming number of the IT people that I would speak to at these events, they absolutely positively refuse to encrypt their backup tapes. Today, they refuse because their job is recovery. Their job is, in the event of a disaster, I have to go grab that tape and get that thing restored. And I don't want to have to worry about what the key is. I don't have to worry that it's encrypted. So they look at their job that if they cannot recover and recover quickly, that they're going to get fired because they're not incentivized to have the data secure. And so this still goes on. So hello. There we go. So these numbers are continuing to go up. So some 30 million records and 51 incidents of lost tapes, not encrypted. I am hearing about some lost tapes, but they don't really care because they are encrypted. Treat them like cash. I mean, it's your value to your company. It's your intellectual property. There are many options to encrypt media. I mean, and they're seamless to business operations as well. So there's drive-level encryption. Most of the drive vendors are producing this. We have inline appliances that will go ahead and take care of some of the key management features and go ahead and encrypt. Some of these are even hardware accelerated, so they can do very large amounts of data very quickly. You also, traditionally we've had the server level software so that it plugs right in with the tape and archival systems. And there are certain hybrid variants of that where the SANS controller or RAID controllers will also facilitate encryption of that media. This allows you to not worry if somebody yanks one of these things out, which is supposedly a dead drive in your SCSI array, puts a new one in, throws the other one in the trash, and somebody finds it. Dumpster diving still happens. Nope. Potentially. There was a talk at Black Hat about pattern recognition and pattern matching in binary files, and there are tools out there that people look at to find within blobs of binary data very specific things. Because actually, if you look at a binary file and you know what to look for, there are literally images or pictures that will kind of pop up, and you know what type of data is. So then all your challenge is to find the beginning point of that data and the end point of that data. And I've watched practitioners of this art pull GIF images or binary executables out of a blob of binary data because they know what they're looking for. So people who are trained in this know what they're doing. There are tools that are free that are okay, and there are some for sale variants that are very, very good that will lead you through the process.
So you shouldn't take the chance.
I wouldn't. So, besides, the technology is becoming pretty commoditized as far as drive and media encryption. So it's not. The cost really isn't that much more than over and above the basic storage. So you had a question?
I can't give you a specific example of that.
So the question is are legacy systems incapable of adopting this type of technology? And for media encryption, they are absolutely, this is an applicable case. If you notice where I've got the red circles, you may not be able to find a vendor who's gonna sell you a Z-series software for the mainframe to encrypt data prior to being put out to tape, but to the rest of the vendors, it's just a data stream. They don't care. It's just data coming in there encrypted. So, yes, sir, you had a question.
We've been able to encrypt all outbound media. In our environment, we got plenty of old stuff, even a 95-year-old company. So you're able to draw a line and say, backups start here and all the equipment on the other side. So I mean, it's kind of like where there's a will, there's a way. Now, as you say, hard drives, no, but there are a lot of times that I question the value of encrypting a hard drive in a data center, if it's in a data center, and performance and all the other stuff that comes along.
I can't lie. Performance is still an issue for many of these products, and so I will typically see if it's a requirement, if it's a compliance mandate, there's some sort of data separation that goes on. There is a change to the operational flow of data within the organization, but it can be done. I watched an insurance company in the Midwest use Oracle to do a two-phase commit back to a mainframe database because they wanted not only different transaction processing, but they also wanted different backup routines. So you're right. Where there's a will, there's a way. It will get done. Number 3 was the accidental disclosure. Surprisingly common, too. There was a case, New York Times basically had information on a story, leaked it. They literally sent it to the wrong party. Inadvertent disclosures. I think this also comes from attrition.org, by the way. So this is in some of the database, the DB-Loss database. So the number of incidents predominantly over the web. So posting information to a website. For those of you who were in here in Jeremiah's discussion earlier, you will notice that the links that are not published but available, this is one form of inadvertent disclosure. There are areas of websites where authentication or authorization are not required, and so that is a leak of information. And today, the dominant way that the number of incidents is through the web, with snail mail being second. However, the number of records lost, still old snail mail. Medical records get mailed to the wrong address all the time. And I've seen some small hospitals shut down and fined because of this, where somebody, some grandma sat there and got a giant container of medical records. So it happens. Accidental disclosures are just as damaging. Real losses, real fines, and so forth. Oh yeah, autocomplete is not your friend. So the talk is about data breaches and encryption. Now, the problem is that data that's on a website or data that's being sent through paper or that's data in use. I mean, it's got to be viewable. And if it's encrypted, it's not viewable. It's not usable. And this is not the type of thing that you're going to solve with encryption. Oops. So one of the things that we recommend is data loss prevention technologies for 2 specific reasons. One, the location of sensitive information that is in its consumable form throughout the organization. So most of the data loss prevention technologies have They have client-side agents that allow you to examine data as it's being used. So they have about 6, 7 different types of technologies, from regex expression checks to find certain types of sensitive information. They have hash chaining and cyclical hash chaining examinations of chunks of data to see if something's sensitive. They do absolute matching. There's a whole bunch of different ways that these technologies can go and find sensitive information. And then it's only a matter of policy under what you do with that. So they can simply alert that it's being accessed and used, or in some cases, if it's very sensitive information, they will automatically encrypt. This technology is available for data at rest, so it will do active scanning in some cases on servers. And it's also network-based by most of the major providers so that you can locate it and potentially encrypt it on the fly. You can create your own denial of service attack internally if you screw up the way you set it up, but it will work. So internal scanning also, data discovery. One of the ways to help find information that could potentially be leaked throughout the organization. There are a lot of email and web security tools that are available nowadays that look for the outbound traffic, scan it for sensitive information to help it from leaking out. But still, this comes down to human error almost every type, and there's not a lot we can do about it other than these types of scanning and discovery technologies. And in the final part of the talk was really about some of the companies that have been hacked and breached. I mean, by malicious parties who are going and getting the data out of the company to use it for fraud. Card Systems is really the poster child for this. They are the one who actually went out of business, and very quickly, by the way. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, so I'm not going to go into details on this, so to make sure we stay on track. TJX, yet another example. And at this point in time, probably the largest set of penalties that have been levied, although this is not the largest breach. I think the Royal Bank of Scotland WorldPay is going to exceed this by far in terms of fines and costs of the company and in the number of cases of fraud. And it's potentially the case with the Heartland Payment Systems breach as well. But with TJX, 45.7 million customers affected initially. Sales continue to rise. So part of my reason for doing the preamble on this is even to this day, customers don't necessarily perceive this as an issue. The companies are not necessarily treating this as a data security problem, but a PR and relationship problem. And even though didn't affect the stock price. So I've got a friend who his name is Dr. Nicholas Imperato. He works at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and he had done a study on mapping stock prices from 6 months before the breach to as far as he could after the breach. But he also did some subjective analysis as well. So he took some interviews, some exit polls, and so forth. And what he found was the companies that appeared to have a plan did not suffer any stock hit whatsoever. I mean, over a period of 6 months after the breach, they did not. It was purely a public relationship exercise. That's what his study had concluded. And if I can find a reference for that, I'll go ahead and get you guys the link.
It really shouldn't be surprising though, because you're talking, certainly as far as sales go, you're talking the average person out in the streets, right? How much do they really know about the TJX breach or any breach?
Or DSW, yeah, whichever one it is.
They're going to go out and shop where they've always shopped. And as far as the people who are buying the stocks and everything else, I don't know that they pay that much attention to data breaches in general either. I mean, it's the security folks that say, oh my God, what are these people doing?
Well,
So if you can put a good spin on it, then you've completely, in the general population, you've completely eclipsed it.
Well, thank you for the comment, because it kind of leads to where I want to go with all of this. That what you're in essence doing is, the individual company may survive, but you're poisoning the entire ecosystem You know, because the credit card issuers are going to pay, or the merchants are going to pay. Behind the scenes, somebody's going to pay for the fraud that actually does happen. So there might be a breach, it might be 100,000 records, and maybe they get lucky, and it's purely, you know, they recover the data doesn't get used, or whatever. But in many cases, it's because this is an active breach with intent to use that data to go commit fraud somewhere else, it's going to get used, and there are going to be hard costs. And sometimes they fall on the individual consumer, sometimes they don't. I'm finding more of an awareness. I've done a couple local things within the Phoenix area to talk about security for local business chapters, and I was actually surprised at the last two that I spoke at, where I want to say about 20% of the audience members had some type of fraud, where there was illegal charges on their credit card. In one case, the woman was sure that she had been a victim of check washing. In another case, she thinks that she had been a victim. Another woman said that she was told that somebody had taken pictures of her check, and those checks were recreated. Different threat model, but nonetheless, I mean, so it's entering into the minds of the average consumer nowadays, but we're still not there. Yes, sir.
So, in your view, what organization, what is it, banks or whatever, or Visa, who has the ability to squeeze corporations to tighten up their security? Obviously, they're not doing it on their own, they're doing it on their own because effectively the costs they bear are simply less than it would cost them to institute full security. Who has the ability right now to change that equation?
Well, technically, the PCI Council for the credit card industry is trying to do that.
PCI.
I'm sorry.
I mean, how much teeth does PCI really have?
Well, we were having a discussion of this over lunch that you know, with an auditor, that, you know, in some cases it appears kind of arbitrary that some organizations, and you had also brought up an example over lunch too, where in one case they have a very, very minor breach and they are fined, and in another case they have a major breach and they're fined the exact same amount, or in a third case they are given an opportunity to go ahead and clean up the mess without a fine. I'm not clear on how they really gauge intent, or what the fine's going to be, or what the remediation course of actions that's required. I know they put them under additional scrutiny, but once again, I'm also aware of a couple of cases that have been covered up. So,
I mean, this is something we cover, and until, you know, an auditor like Ernst & Young is going in and certifying that a company's financials are good, if they're wrong, they have a fiduciary exposure here. These auditors that go into these PCI, they have no skin in this game.
that's true.
So until then,
Other than their company, but their company, if the company went out of business, they just all go get other jobs elsewhere because there are not enough QSAs out there to do the work.
it's kind of a joke, really.
At this point, yes. My contention has always been, why on earth does the merchant get my credit card number? I don't want him to have it. I mean, Amazon stores mine. I don't want them to. They did it automatically. I don't have a choice in the matter, really. I think I might now, over the last year or so, that they put in the ability so I can actually delete it. But there are a number of merchants out there that don't give me that opportunity. They're going to store it.
I think the original model that was planned to be used for that, they didn't get it. They went to the bank on their card thing and said, I've got this guy with me, wanted to spend $100. Is he good for it? The bank said he's good for it. And the merchant never saw it come out.
But now
They scream bloody murder, actually. I am able to verify this through some sources. Others will deny it. But many of the merchants wanted to maintain the relationship with the customer long term. They wanted the data metrics on what they were buying. They wanted to use the credit card number as a primary key because they didn't have social security number. They needed the information to help them maintain profitable business. Well, I say that, but if I go to a business and I pay cash, and I don't know if any of you read my blog or not, but I actually tried the experiment. I went back to cash last month, and it was a really weird experience, but that's certainly something. I give them a $100 bill, I get my groceries back, that's it. Nobody knows what I bought. They don't have my credit card number. It can't be breached. But that's the extent of the relationship, is they simply know who I am because they see me come in every week.
Get stuck up for your $100 in the alley.
Well, there's that, but I've never been mugged, but I've had my credit cards replaced a couple times because there have been fraudulent charges on it. Usually the worst thing is the auto debit people. You tell them you don't want to pay anymore, you're taking your business elsewhere. They keep paying, charging until you cancel the credit card. But there are cases with my credit card that have been charges that shouldn't have been there. Couple of different cases. So to me, that is, I'm at more risk there. I have a bigger exposure there with the credit card than I do. So even though I'm supposedly only liable for $50, I've got to go through the annoying process of getting it cleared up. And I don't do online banking. I'm probably one of the only security professionals that don't, because most of the people I know actually do online banking. I don't trust it. I know that my browser can be hacked 9 different ways easily, so I just don't trust it. And the only type of shopping I do online is through eBay, because I've got a little, PayPal fob, because I trust that.
Big issue, because governments want to deliver service through the net, business wants to do business through the net because it's cheapest. You've still got up to 20% of the people who don't trust it, so they'll provide a more expensive method for you to do business with.
Do any of you not do online banking? I'm the only weirdo. Okay.
What do you know that we don't know?
So once again, how it happened, compromised web, injection of code within TJ Maxx, cybercrimes are increasing. Once again, this really isn't necessarily something that encryption is going to help with unless we are encrypting the data at rest and encrypting data in transmission. We still have to protect those systems that do the processing. I will get to the next one I want. There we go. So I don't even know what to say about Heartland. I mean, maybe it's only 600 records. Maybe it's 100 million. I don't either, but we don't know. So one of the reoccurring themes throughout this talk.
Financial institutions, it didn't say 600 records.
Nope. So it's at least that's my floor is 600. But if they're processing 100 million through the system, that's probably my high water mark. You're going to expect that those credit cards got used more than once. So it's probably not that either. But the number could be anywhere in between. So what do you do with a breach of this size?
Now, did I read correctly where it said that the banks and the financial institutions have to pay the replacement of the cards? And why isn't the entity that
The issuing
breached
banks.
have to foot that cost? Because they're the ones that would breach.
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for you. But from my standpoint, that there is a lot that's going on here that we could actually help with as security professionals to learn about what's going on. I think we're getting about 30% of the useful information we could. There's a lot that we could do as security professionals if we had the other half of the picture. If we knew what the fraud rates were. Because these attacks coming in through the internet are automated. They can go against hundreds or thousands of sites. They can try the same attack over and over again. And as Jeremiah said in the previous one, I don't need all your vulnerabilities, I just need one. So, yes, sir, you had a question.
I just want to make a comment. You and I talked last night about fraud rates. The main breach report gives some numbers for TJX and Hannaford in May. It's like 0.5%, 1/4%. He just put some numbers up for TJX, like 63 to 80-something million. And I did a little quick calculating, and that really works out to about the same as the main breach report. But less than 0.5%, and about $455 per fraud. So it may be that we really do know more than we think about fraud rates. Just a comment I wanted to make, since it's a sample size of 2. That's not great, but that's a lot better than 0.
There's a couple ways I could respond to that. So they had determined that information had been being siphoned out of there since 2005. So when they started to realize that there was a problem was when they noticed elevated fraud rates with a very, very high statistical probability that it was coming from TJX. So we don't know. We don't know how many. And you've got to remember, too, that Yeah. So they had changed their tactic. What it was told was they were going into supermarkets and they were pulling cards off the shelf, taking transactional data from the credit card information that was being stored both legally and illegally, putting it onto a Home Depot card, and going out and using it. In other ways, they were taking credit card transactions and buying Home Depot cards with them through fake credit cards, and then going ahead and using those to cash out. So there were a number of different ways that they were getting money out of the system based upon this, and in a number of different countries as well. And some of you might have gone to a grocery store recently and noticed that certain grocery stores won't allow you to buy the gift cards with a credit card for exactly that reason. So this was actually the original talk that we were going to give, was the data security lifecycle, but encryption fits into this quite nicely. That if we examine information from its creation to the point in time we no longer need it or should be destroying it, every single one of these steps has certain security steps that we can perform. And in many of these, in the storage, the sharing, and the archival of this data, or even the destruction, encryption is an appropriate tool and an effective tool to help with this. Where we run into trouble is where the people have to actually use it. And those are the areas where we have to support our efforts with other types of technologies. Laptops, desktops, portable media. So just to kind of wrap up this presentation, really I think the disclosures that we've had have really taught us the wrong lesson, or taught the market the wrong lesson. Hasn't taught the market how to secure the data. It's taught them how to react to not get penalized. Blame the credit card companies because they're not changing enough of the system and the ecosystem by which we use these things to secure us. So ultimately, they're gonna bear the brunt of a lot of this, but the merchants are along the way as well. So sooner or later. And my guess with breaches like the Heartland payment system, where I could probably poison the entire ecosystem, the credit card infrastructure, sooner or later something's going to happen. It's going to happen, just for fun, if nothing else. Customers do suffer from identity fraud. Retailers suffer from credit card fraud. We need complete breach disclosure. More importantly, we need complete fraud disclosure. The cybersecurity threat teams do have better information. The FBI does have better information. They're not disclosing it. Destabilizes the market. That's illegal. And we should have a root cause analysis. We do have a lot of security professionals out here, a lot of them at this conference. They're good at solving problems. Or at the very least, we should eliminate a lot of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it shouldn't be so darn easy to literally get information off a disk drive off of eBay, or a laptop in the back seat, or a backup tape that falls off. We've got technologies to do this. They're cost-effective. They work. So, recommendations: encrypt your freaking laptops. Media gets moved, it's going to get lost, and it lasts a really, really long time. So if even it takes a long time for somebody to find it, odds are eventually somebody will find it. Encryption works. I've been doing it for years. It was good then. It works now. And there are a lot of qualified vendors to supply it. And if you can, reduce the storage of it. There's a lot of information we don't need to collect. We've been deriving value from a lot of information. I'm a database expert. I've done a lot of BI work. I know it's handy to have around to look up, but if it's sensitive information, you run the risk. You run the risk of having it lost.
The flip side is you've got possibly regulatory requirements that you have to hold on to that
That's right.
data you don't want to for extended periods of time.
That's right. Most of the federal laws do have some sort of retention period. It's not necessarily specified, but it is mandated that there is a retention period. Sometimes it's self-defined, sometimes it is defined. Legal documents also. My wife's a real estate broker, so I've got files and files and files in my garage that are supposed to be kept for 7 years or whatever. So yeah, I know. And as we get to electronic record storage more and more, as companies like Iron Mountain move from a physical storage to an electronic storage, this whole concept of crypto shredding or end-of-life data is more important, because if you don't do something about it, it lives on forever. Its half-life is indefinite. So unless we do something with cryptography to secure that data so we can throw it away or just throw the keys away, it lives forever. Now, granted, it deteriorates in value and it gets dirty by itself over time. It goes out of date, but still, it's there. And a Social Security number has a very long lifespan, too. I think that's it. Any questions? Little choppy, I'm sorry. It was the first time I ever delivered this particular presentation. I've basically taken one of Rich's slide decks in mine and put this together, but hopefully it was useful. No other questions? Well, thank you very much.